Well, joining us this morning to discuss security challenges and how to manage them for a smooth electoral process is YINKA OGUNSANYA, who served a total of 13 years of active duty as a soldier in the United States Army. He was commissioned in 2002 through the Officer Candidate School OCS at Fort Benning, GA, in the Air and Missile Defense, where he was one of the 5 distinguished military graduates for his class. Major Ogunsanya will be joined by KABIR Adamu, a professional security and intelligence executive with a sound track record in the public and private, including humanitarian and development sectors. He's experienced in security consultancy and project management at the multinational level and has supported clients with operations in hostile, challenging, and complex environments. KABIR holds a doctorate degree in strategic security risk management. Now, let's get straight into it. And I'm starting with you, Mr. KABIR. Thank you so much for being on the show this morning. Now, from looking at Islamist militancy to separatist agitations, banditry, and farmer-head-on conflict in between when it comes to insecurity, there's no geopolitical zone in Nigeria that is unaffected. Now, looking at this on the backdrop of the forthcoming elections, what will this mean for the running and credibility of the polls? Start with you, Mr.
Thank you, Shoetan and Kadaria. Good morning, and I hope you're off to a great start in 2023. This is a complex environment, if you allow me to summarize it as such. What it means is that several communities across the country are security challenged. It means INEC, which is over 176,000 polling units, will be forced to deploy and conduct elections in this security challenged environment. In a circumstance where it does not own a single security operative, it's having to rely on, if you allow me to say, third parties. In this context, I mean public security departments, about 29 of them, to support the provision of an safe, secure, and conducive environment for it to conduct that elections. Now, what INEC did is to put together an ad hoc committee of this, about 20 plus members of the public security department. It calls that committee the Interagency Consultative Committee on Election Security. And the idea is to facilitate some handshaking interaction between INEC and the public security department so that they are aligned in terms of what INEC's expectations are and then what these security agencies need to do. Consistently, this committee, I'll be calling it ICES, that's the acronym for it. This committee meets regularly at the federal level, and ideally it's meant to also meet at the state level and then at the local government level, so that this security challenged environment is not only identified, but it is also managed to ensure that INEC is able to do its job. Now, the second component is what INEC has in-house. INEC has a tool it calls FMAT, which is the Election Violence Monitoring and Advocacy Tool. It's a very innovative tool that INEC has kind of evolved over the years, and I think it started as far back as 2012, and currently it's deployed using modern technology. There's an app on the phone. It goes out to survey security environment. It collates the results of that survey, conduct what in security parlance we call a security risk assessment, and then makes that risk assessment available to members of this ICES. And then the result is that the two sides are aligned on where the security challenges are. And then, of course, the expectation, and I use this word consciously, the expectation is that the security departments will now manage the environment. So what is the reality at the moment? Just like you've pointed and showed, and the reality is that across the 6 geopolitical zones, there are several communities that unfortunately are security challenged. So INEC is going to conduct the elections in that circumstance. And let me use the Northwest, which I'm sure Kadaria is very familiar with, to explain all that I've said over the last 3-4 minutes. If we pick Katsina and Zamfara State, that have several security challenge communities. What the result of this interaction between INEC and ISIS has done is to identify the most violent security exposed communities. And the result is that INEC is attempting to do two things. In some areas, it's moving the voters and the polling unit from there to less security prone environment. And we've been informed that it would move the residents of those communities, that's the ones that are still remaining. Of course, a lot of them have been displaced, but the ones that are remaining, INEC will provide transportation for them, bring them to the less security challenged areas where they will vote, and then, of course, return them after they vote.
Doctor, let's bring in Mr. Yinka with your military background abroad and sort of experiences of running security outside this country, and then now looking in with what Doctor has sort of explained. Are you satisfied that we could run credible polls under these sort of circumstances? And given what we understand INEC is now doing based on what we've just heard?
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I do believe we can have the election as scheduled. He touched on some certain points doing the credible risk analysis. When you do this analysis, it has to be from external parties. It can't be the same people that's going to be running the show doing the analysis, because then they're going to be a little bit biased towards what they're doing. So you want to bring third parties, everybody to the table, and do something we call walking the walk. So everybody knows exactly what part of the security controls and measures they need to do, and they have to rehearse. You can't just produce a document and expect it to happen on election day. There must be some rehearsals, and it's just not one time. They need to start doing it now.
Right. I mean, based on what Doctor is saying, just to follow up a little bit on that, there seems to be some sort of grouping that has been put together now and is actively thinking about that. The concern, though, is that if you look at how thinly spread both the military are as well as the police, there are questions of whether they will actually be effective. So you may sort of know what you want to do, but is the capacity enough to be able to ensure that you can protect people when they come out to vote, and that people will not take advantage of elections taking place to actually cause mayhem?
Unfortunately, what we have to do is kind of figure out what are the high-valued assets, which areas that would deem more critical, because you can never have 100% security across board. But in doing the analysis, you identify where your threats are coming from. If we're thinking it's going to be an external threat, then the border should be locked down. And we should have something called quick reactionary teams that are basically mobile and agile and hound on secure radios so they can move from one point to the other. You can't be stationary to protect the election. They have to be very mobile and agile.
All right, then I want to take it back to Dr. Kabir. Now, the country director of the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, Sarah J., said that the training of security personnel to be deployed for the polls is the antidote to peaceful elections. You have spoken about, rehearsing and making sure. Do you think that that is where it ends? Just making sure that these security personnel on ground have been trained well enough. Now, don't forget that of the 1.4 million workers that are going to be spread out from, INEC, about 70% of those are actually youth corpers who are just spending their 1 year trying to serve their country. Is that enough? I'm going to come to you, Dr. Kabir, and then you'd answer in studio.
Okay, so let's the report that you anchored this segment of the show with by your correspondent referred to a statement by Professor Zuru, who is the chairman of the Electoral Institute. And in my honest opinion, I requested for that speech, and I think he was misinterpreted by a significant segment of the media. What the occasion where he made that statement was meant to validate about 4 documents, including a security handbook for all security operatives that will be deployed during the elections. So I'm responding to a question by telling you that INEC on its own, as well as several civil society organizations, have attempted to approach election security management from a very structural and systematic manner. They've produced 4 documents, including a handbook. They've also engaged with the management of this security department. Remember, I said there are about 27 or 29 of them. And what they've done is during that engagement, they've attempted to introduce election security management training at the level of both recruitment as well as the training of security operatives. So now if you go to some schools owned by some of the security organizations, you find out that there is a module in their training component on election security management. So it's not just a week, 2 weeks, 1 month, 6 months before an election that security operatives are trained. They are actually trained, during their normal training procedures. And then ahead of the elections itself, several training components are organized. Just yesterday, the Inspector General of Police graduated a significant portion of our mobile police. I'm a little bit surprised it wasn't significantly covered by the media, but there was a circular released by the Inspector General of Police to that effect. And that's just one of the several other 27 or 29 security departments. So a lot is being done in that regard to train our security operatives on election security management. But that is just one component. If time would allow us, there are, to my knowledge, so 2 components of this risk assessment that ends up in the production of an election security plan, as it were. There is a general component which looks at internal and external threats to the election. And then there is an expert component where persons who are experts in election security management also produce their input. And then these 2 are matched together. And it is the result that ends up being what the product that INEC and then ISS uses for election security management. But suffice to say that a lot of work is being done on the ground that unfortunately, for some reasons, is not in the public space.
Okay. I mean, YINKA, he sounds very confident, and I think it's because he has information that maybe the generality of the public don't have. Part of the things that sort of work when you're managing public events, such as an institution, is perception matters. Yes. So, for example, the perception of insecurity could influence the number of people who come out to vote. And we sit down and listen to an expert like Dr. Kabir, and he's telling us a lot is happening. That lot is not out in the public domain. So how critical is communication to security when it comes to the management of public events?
Thank you very much. My first take on that is, all these policies being done behind the scenes really don't matter much unless there's a show of force, show of training that the public can witness, like you said. If there's a continuous patrol, increasing number of people with security tactics going around these rural areas, people will feel more confident to come out. But if it's just, for me, I've been involved in 2 elections outside this country, Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's very similar to what's happening up in the north. And one of the issues we see on the ground is intimidation by the terrorists. And the only way you can actually have them step back a little bit for you to have a free and fair election is show of force. Because you have to show of force. You have to be hands-on. Because the average Joe police officer on the ground might not even see that policy paper. So how are we going to implement it? Those guys are supposed to be the one conducting the risk assessment and telling you eyeball to eyeball, this is what I'm facing on the ground. As a commander, my guys will tell me exactly what their challenges are, and I'll encourage them to resolve it, and I'll send it up to my higher. That's how you get things done. When you sit in a comfortable office and coming up with a plan for somebody that's going to be on the ground, that's a disaster recipe for disaster.
Let me just right off the back of that quickly before Shaito asks her question. We sort of are focused on sort of the terrorists, the bandits, the insurgents, the separatist movements. But there's also a degree of violence that happens among politicians.
Yes.
So voter suppression, for example, is suspected to be a thing in this election, mostly because politicians are increasingly as a result of INEC reforms, losing the opportunity to manipulate elections. There was a time when they could just write numbers. Now we're declaring at the polling station. We've got technology that is documenting and sending results almost instantly. So the expectation is that you will see a degree of voter suppression by politicians themselves in areas where they think they may not do very well. I mean, to what extent can these things be married? Is it possible, given where we are, for security services to be worrying about, if you like, the high value, conflicts? So the terrorism, the Boko Haram, all of that, the separatist IPOB in the east, while also keeping an eye on politicians.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that we have a limited amount of resources, so we have to do a high-level prioritization and see who's going to have most impact. If you think that voter suppression and intimidation is going to be the problem, then we need to channel our resources towards that. But if the terrorism is deemed, based on the analysis, their risk analysis, to be the highest, that's what you want to focus on as well, because you want to have most impact with the least amount of effort.
Definitely. We'll just take it back to Dr. Kabir. Now, just to follow up on even what Kadir said, now the Nigerian Elections Violence Tracker documented 130 violent and at least 200 fatalities linked to politics. Now, just like you said, Kadir, now political violence has increased in the run-up to the elections. Moreover, with Nigeria's three major ethnic groups all represented by frontline presidential candidates, they are most likely to be ethnic divisions exploited by die-hard political supporters using disinformation to further ignite tensions. Now, should there also be a focus on cyber security, how people are going to use, social media to incite violence and to even push further their agenda, voter suppression? Should there be a focus on that as well?
Definitely, and in fact, if I'm going to categorize the risks, to the 2023 elections, cyber threat would probably come, if not number one, number two. The good thing is at the level of INEC is doing a lot. Just like you've mentioned, INEC has adopted technology, and a lot of that technology, the superstructure upon which that technology lies, is in the cyberspace. And so anyone, for instance, who wants to disrupt a component or even the elections itself would engage, in some form of cyber warfare or attack. And we know, looking back at the 2019 elections, that was done. Even though the results of that, or the benefit that they got, was to influence the outcome of the elections, which is a totally different thing from disrupting the elections, as it were. And we also know, if you allow me out a little bit be circumspect here, we also know the countries that were involved. We also have an idea of the organizations that were involved. And that was 2019. A lot has happened in terms of development, in terms of new tools for influencing the outcome of elections between 2019 and 2023. So it is a major challenge. But the good news is this: like I mentioned, INEC is aware. INEC has invested massively in strengthening firewalls and other protection measures it has within the cyber and other IT components that it is using for the elections. Unfortunately, it's not my field, so I can't confidently say that what INEC has done is enough. The other positive development is that because Nigeria is a part of the global community, and if I use the police as an example, the Nigerian police is actively aligned with Interpol. And I know that we've been receiving a lot of information with regards to threats that I imagine, some of them, of course, within the cyberspace. We've also been receiving a lot of training. So I know, and again, I'll be circumspect here, I know that several of our security departments have received training, have received resources to enhance their capacity for managing some components of the cyber threat that could affect the 2023 elections. My conclusion would be we need more effort in this regard. And the role of the fourth estate, cannot be overemphasized. I must commend you for providing this platform. And I think others too, especially including the civil society organizations, need to speak a little bit more around this area so that we enhance awareness. And of course, with the awareness, the expectations is that the mitigation measures would also increase.
Let's wrap up with you, Mr. Yinka. You talked about the fact that you have run elections in both Afghanistan and in Iraq, sort of very high-profile conflict areas. There are people who don't understand these things and would be wondering, why is it important that in spite of conflict, we go ahead and actually do elections? Why does it matter that we do our best to ensure that we go to the polls even where there is serious conflict? Because
you have a new government coming in, and you want to instill confidence in people that it was free and fair, and that was their choice. And also you're trying to give people hope that there's going to be a better tomorrow. At the same time, you have to worry about physical aspect of the protection. I know the cyber is huge, the social media is huge, but what do we accept as normalcy with body counts for an election? Right. So that's going to be the biggest challenge for us. I personally, I think we're doing well with the cyber, but the social media, there's really nothing you can do. It's just sad. We don't have control of Facebook or Twitter that you can censor. I mean,
there's a global conversation around whether tech companies should start taking some responsibility.
If you remember, it was a big part of the U.S. election last time, and to the point that the president was actually banned off Twitter himself. It's really hard because it's more of a social media farming. They pay people, not even in your country, to make comments that's already scripted against candidates back and forth. So how do you arrest and stop those guys from doing so?
Definitely a thought to ponder on. Thank you so much for joining us on the morning show, Mr. Ogunsanya, and of course, Dr. Kabir.